right there.
And spell your name for me.
Fritz Roka, F-R-I-T-Z-R-O-K-A.
Very good. And what's your title?
Associate Professor, Agricultural Economics, University of Florida, at the Southwest Research and Education Center. Thank you.
Very good.
Good.
Okay. So you're going to look right at John, and when he asks you a question, if you want to just kind of repeat it back in the form of a statement, so we get the full gist of
Okay.
what we're talking about.
There's going to be some heavy editing here too, right?
Just leave it on the floor, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's good.
Are you ready, Aaron?
I am ready.
All right. Well, Fritz, we're trying to tell the story of mechanical harvesting. Tell me how you got involved with mechanical harvesting, and a little bit about the website that you've developed.
Well, I got involved in mechanical harvesting in 1999. I had been here a couple years. I had delved into a little bit of labor issues, harvesting labor issues. And so Ron Moraro from Lake Alfred Center called me and said, there's this new program emerging out of the Department of Citrus about mechanical harvesting. They need some help in looking at the economic feasibility of some of these machines, and I'd like to invite you to participate. So at that point, I got introduced to Dr. Galen Brown, who was at that time was the harvesting administrator for the Department of Citrus had hired Galen to be their administrator for the harvesting program. And actually, I think that got set up in 1995, or at least the grower group got together in 1995 to talk about resurrecting the mechanical harvesting program. And then 96, 97, they got their group going. I think Jackie Burns got started with her precision work. And then they actually got machines close to starting to be operational. And at that point, they wanted to bring someone in to do, I think, two things: performance evaluations to collect data on how these machines are going to be actually performing in a commercial citrus situation, and then start to put some numbers to it as to whether this could be an economically feasible or a financially feasible proposition for both growers and for harvesting manufacturers.
As I understand it, the harvesting committee was funded through a box tax that growers paid, at least early on, and so that money was generated to get the mechanical harvesting program underway. But the early program took place in the 70s and 80s, when some of the first equipment was experimented with. Now, when Galen came in, this was a resurrection of the program. Was there still a box tax associated when they had to be to hire Galen, wasn't there?
Well, there was a box tax associated with funding the harvesting program, or I'm not sure if it was a separate box tax or the department took revenues or took part of their box tax collections and put it into the mechanical harvesting program. So it was a completely grower-funded effort by the Department of Citrus. I believe the budget for the first couple years was about $1 million a year, and I think that got up to, when we reached our zenith of activity, it got to be about $2 million a year. And I believe that $2 million was what it was for a good long time, because Jackie Burns' abscission program took about $500,000 of that budget each year for the abscission part of the work. And then most of the DOC money after that went to what they call development loans, encouraging innovators, manufacturers to come in and suggest equipment. If the committee thought it was a good idea, then they would come up with a loan package that they would fund these manufacturers or inventors, more inventors, not so much manufacturers. And then they would take it and develop a machine and hopefully bring it to a commercial point of production, at which point the idea was that the people would pay back the money to the Department of Citrus.
Talk to me a little bit about Galen Brown. I interacted with him several times, but he seemed to have a pretty good idea of what was required if mechanical harvesting was going to be successful.
Galen Brown had a very specific idea of what had to be done. He had no, I don't want to say sympathy, but no patience for mechanical harvesting aids. He had investigated that line of thinking and backwards and forwards and decided that was not going to be the answer for Florida's juice processing sector. Again, to be clear, this is all about harvesting for juice, grapefruit juice, oranges, mainly juice oranges. Nothing to do with hand picking of fresh fruit. So Galen's idea was to make this thing commercially viable, we had to get equipment to do mass harvesting removal. Giving individuals equipment to pick up their productivity one or two-fold wasn't going to cut it. So he was thinking, in that sense, I think a different idea of how mechanical harvesting should work here in Florida, in conjunction with abscission. So, but even the abscission part was all connected to making the machines more effective.
Yeah, I think early on, we had different approaches to mechanical harvesting. Some people used it to pick hardship picking trees. Back even when hedging and topping wasn't a widespread practice, and so we were still picking 35-foot trees, and others then tried to move into more of a mass removal of fruit. But I think that when you got into the picture, it was pretty clear that mechanical harvesting was going to be something that was only going to function when you had a certain type of grove that could give you a large enough volume of fruit that you could bring some equipment in and remove. If I remember correctly, Galen was looking at least 2,500 boxes per day per machine, something like that, or a rather
Something
large
like that,
number
yeah.
of fruit that need to be picked.
Well, I don't think Galen had some, yes, very definite ideas about the most effective areas that mechanical harvesting would work, and we're currently in Southwest Florida, and this is the heart of where he thought the mechanical harvesting concepts would take off, because we've got big acreage, we've got uniform, at that time, uniform looking groves, nicely hedged, and in that environment he could see these machines, especially the canopy shakers, working very efficiently. But to Galen's point, he was also willing to look at a lot of other technologies to investigate whether they could help growers that don't fit the conditions we have down here. So he encouraged the folks that developed the mongoose, as he calls them, the area canopy shakers that kind of have this head that goes into the tree and shakes the sections of the tree. So John Crunkleton spent a lot of time and effort building what he calls the canopy penetrator that went in to remove fruit. These machines were thought of as machines that could handle non-uniform grove conditions. So Galen was very much interested in trying to service as much of the industry as possible. But he did have a long-term view, and the long-term view was that groves would evolve into what we had down here. And I say had because greening obviously has changed a lot of stuff, but looking at trees that were uniform, maybe even going to dwarfing trees or looking at size control trees, so that you can put a machine out there and really have it move. And to the extent we actually achieved that with the Oxbow canopy shakers, at that point we actually increased worker productivity tenfold. So I think the record, I guess you'd have to check this out with a couple people. I'd probably check it out with Tom Visser, but I think he picked 40 some loads in one day. That's 4,600 box trailers in one day. And he seemed to think he could go like that forever if the grower would just let him go.
Well, so the evolution since the late 90s until a couple of years ago, from all these machines, have you finally evolved down into a particular type of machine or a machine that has survived the test of time and became a viable commercial entity?
Your question is, have we found a harvesting machine that will take over the citrus industry?
Well, that will
And the answer is no.
cost effectively remove fruit.
We found machines, yes. I firmly believe that we were successful in finding machines and having machines work that were cost effective. Both, as I mentioned before, the Oxbow canopy shaker, but also the Coe trunk shaker, or the trunk shaker, of which Coe is the predominant user, the Coe Collier machine actually. that machine system proved, in my mind, to be very cost effective as well. In fact, probably more cost effective than the Oxbow because it was cheaper in terms of the capital costs.
Yeah, it must be a sizable investment to buy the
Oh, yeah.
Oxbow machine with goats and
The-
have on both sides of the tree with the catch frames
Yeah.
and the folding shakers. And
Oh yeah, the kind of a capital investment you're talking about for an Oxbow machine, the whole set, which is a right-hand side, left-hand side, or bed and swell shaker, working in tandem, and then 4, call them goats, but specially fitted goats that they can go forward or backward. Anyway, that ensemble of equipment was about $1.3 to $1.4 million, brand new. The co-collier trunk shaking system included, again, 2 machines, a shaker and a catcher, and then 1 traditional goat that could kind of relieve the receiver to offload the food back to the trailer. That ensemble cost maybe $250,000, brand new. So you could put, if you put 4 machines, 4 co-collier machines out there, or 5, I guess, to equal 1 Oxbow, you could probably do maybe 20–30% more fruit removal than 1 set of Oxbows. But growers quickly moved to the Oxbow machines, at least those that were interested, because they perceived less damage to the overall tree versus the trunk shaker that looked pretty violent when you see it. I mean, it was pretty violent. When you looked at it, it grabbed the trunk, it shook it pretty well, and growers saw that and they just about had a heart attack when they saw their trees being shook out of the ground. So when they saw the canopy shaker, they perceived that that machine was a little less violent on to their trees, and they eventually the co-shakers fell out of favor, and the canopy shakers did the rest of the work for the time that we had with them.
Okay, now, part of your area of expertise was looking at the economic analysis.
Right.
And you also put together a website that accumulated all of the information on mechanical harvesting. Tell me a little bit about the website and how it was assembled and what information is there, because you've run through machines and everything else.
Yeah.
I assume a lot of this stuff is documented if somebody wants to go find it.
That's right. My role in this mechanical harvesting project was not just doing the field evaluations, but also to work on extension components, of which the website was sort of our core thing. We viewed the website as you just said, as a place to collect all the known information and developing information about mechanical harvesting. So we went back into the old program and literally went through every issue of the Florida State Horse Society, pulled out all the documents that were in there, and usually during the 60s and 70s, 60s especially, there was at least 1, if not 2 articles by Drs. Hedden and Kopic, and then later on Jody Whitney and others that were publishing their work on what they were doing. So we collected all that information, and then as we moved into what I call the second phase of mechanical harvesting, which is post-1995, then we had all the other information that we were collecting. Jackie Burns's abscission program, Jim Syverson's tree health program, our evaluations. So all those things were then compiled. I think one of the things I'm most proud of, and this is again a credit to Dr. Whitney, is that we were able to preserve his film and still footage in one spot, with some documentation as to what people were actually looking at. So Jody basically had 1 mile of 16mm film in various canisters in his office, and he took that 5,280 feet of film to a digitizer, and that whole thing was digitized. And then from that, he wrote a history of insert a video that you could actually see what he was talking about, and then along with some still photographs as well. So I think that's really what I find exciting.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal, and that's why we want to talk about mechanical harvesting, because there is a lot that is recorded. And you've taken Jody's stuff plus all the other stuff and have it. We'll post a website on the video so
cool.
people can find where it is and go to get some of that. But from your experience, how would you characterize the growers that were interested in mechanical harvesting, because not everybody was wanted to even try, or probably go out and be terrified, like you said, seeing a tree get shaken. So what kind of a grower, what growers accepted this, were willing to try it?
What kind of grower would be willing to try mechanical harvesting?
Desperate growers?
No.
Innovative
No.
growers?
I think growers that recognize the future, and that future, that future was we can't rely on a knows 95% of our oranges are destined for the juice market, and to sit there and rely on a human hand picking every piece of that fruit almost borders on insanity. And the fact that the industry has existed with a hand harvest base so long is a pretty good testament to the industry and its survivability. And I keep thinking, how long can this keep going on and on and on and on? But evidently we're still doing it. And now we're morphing into the H2A program, which is a further intensification of hand harvesting. But pretty much every other agronomic and even most other horticultural crops that are for processing are machine picked. And here we are in Florida in the citrus industry, and we're still ladders and bags. And the best technological innovation we've had in the last 50 years is the goat. So with this hydraulic boom, I mean that's. But
it almost seems too as if.
And then you need the labor.
And the acreage drops,
Right.
and the volume of fruit to be picked has
Right.
dropped, and so now we had people, and so the interest waned because we didn't need them anymore. We did have
Exactly.
people, and even though the economy was booming, we still had enough people to remove the fruit. But in that first effort, it really was kind of questionable as to whether it was economically feasible
Yeah.
or not. I mean, there were all kind of things out there: the water cannons, the air shakers,
shakers,
and
decision itself.
so forth. But I think we have evolved into systems that now are economically feasible. They're more than just wild ideas.
Well, obviously I wasn't around here in the 60s, so a lot of this is history for me as well. But it was interesting to talk to some folks back then and to read some of the stuff. And very quickly it became apparent to me that the focus in the first program, that I call that the 60s program, was all about labor. We don't have enough labor, we need machines to get our crops picked. And I believe at that time the industry was recovering from its own series of freezes earlier, and we were building up, and people were seeing this production going up and up and up, and realizing we don't have enough people to pick the crops. So we had this really a big concern about labor. Well, once the labor situation dissipated because of freezes, then the interest in mechanical harvesting waned. I really thought we had a shot, and I think we still do. I want to convey an ongoing sense of optimism that we will get this thing figured out. But when we went into the initial, into the, I call it the 1990s program, 1995 program, the second program, I really thought the climate had changed. Yes, labor was still a concern. We were recovering from our freezes from the 80s, so people were seeing production going up, especially down here in Southwest Florida. Again, wondering, do we have enough people to pick the crop? But Brazil was a new character in the equation that wasn't in existence back in the 60s. And Brazil was posing a significant challenge to the industry in its ability, as Ron Mararo's numbers suggested, the Brazilian grower could grow, harvest, process, and ship FCOJ to Tampa 20 cents a pound solid less than a Florida grower could do. Well, all of a sudden, now the grower had an economic incentive to get mechanical harvesting figured out. And now there was an economic incentive to make machines not just labor saving, but cost savings. And to that, I think with Galen's leadership, we succeeded. I think the industry succeeded in finding trunk shakers and canopy shakers that effectively reduce the cost of harvesting, and significantly.
Well, talk a little bit about the role that HLB has played in the mechanical harvesting arena.
Well, the role of HLB pretty much brought the whole mechanical harvesting program to a screeching halt. But we have to go back, again, going back into the late 90s when mechanical harvesting was resurrected and trunk shakers and canopy shakers were starting to make commercial inroads. The vast number of growers were very concerned about how these machines were affecting their health, affecting the health. Well, yes, their health, because they could see their trees going out, so their health was affected too. But the health of their trees, they saw damage. They saw damage. They saw bark when the trunk shakers were going. Initially, they were scuffing the bark, actually basically girdling the trees. They saw limbs being broken. If the trees weren't skirted right, major scaffold limbs were being ripped off. And so a grower would look at his trees or her trees after a machine went through and say, my God, they're going to be dead in a year. So yeah, I saved money this year, but what good is it if my trees are dead? A lot of research, again, I'll credit Jim Syverson at CREC, as well as people before him. I think even Al Hedden did some work on this that I think very effectively documented that the citrus trees pre-greening were very resilient. Were always very, very resilient. You beat them up pretty good, but little nutrition, little water, they bounce back. And what Jim Syverson's work demonstrated, again, is that a well-nourished citrus tree can withstand mechanical harvesting and recover without any adverse effects, both short-term and long-term. I was involved in a study that followed up on what Jim did. When we actually took grower records, we went to growers who were mechanically harvesting and who also were hand harvesting, and we said, please let us look at the data, the yield data from your blocks that were hand-picked versus the yields from your blocks that were machine-picked. And basically from about 40-some blocks, we collected about 10 years worth of harvesting, and there was no significant difference in yield between hand-picked blocks and machine-picked blocks, even when those blocks had been picked continually for 10 years. So to me, that kind of bolstered the arguments that have been raised all along. But again, the caveat was a well-nourished tree recovered. HLB has changed that definition. Now, I'm not a horticulturalist, but I think we cannot say that our citrus trees are well-nourished.
So the tree that's stressed with HLB
Right.
does not respond nearly as well
All right.
to mechanical harvest.
If you're someone who's suffering from any kind of an immune compromising disease, and I throw the common cold on you, chances are you're not going to do as well as if you didn't have that depressed systems. I think it's the same. I mean, I'd say the same analogy with the tree. The tree's health has been compromised, and now you're putting an added stress through mechanical harvesting. It does make sense. Now, we haven't gone out there and done the research to prove that, but it makes pretty strong intuitive sense. And all the research that has been going on about the horticultural care of HLB-infected trees are saying anything we can do to relieve stress, whether it's water, nutrition, soil microbes, or whatever disease you're talking about, anything we can do to relieve stress helps the infected tree. So by that extension, the last thing you want to do is to pound it with a mechanical harvester. So the technology that we came up with, or the technology that Galen brought into the industry and helped commercialize, the trunk shaker and the canopy shaker just aren't the right machines for what we're dealing with now, and that is with the HLB-infected trees. Now, that's not to say that we should not lose hope.
Well, you're right. Things turn around, things change. The last thing that you leave, how critical do you think that abscission chemical is in the mechanical harvesting picture?
How critical is abscission to mechanical harvesting? John, I honestly don't know. At one time, I thought it was critical. Mainly because of this impact that these machines were having on the trees, and the concern growers had about the damage that machines were causing. So if you could have abscission, and in theory, if the abscission chemical is applied and you can loosen the fruit to such an extent that the machine just kind of brushes the tree very gently and all the fruit rains off, I saw that as the most important contribution. And that's different from what abscission was initially designed for. Abscission was initially investigated to extend the harvesting season and to be able to harvest Valencia trees all the way into June. And what is a fact is that in terms of a yield impact, if you harvest a Valencia tree in late May, early June, when you got next year's crop a couple inches in diameter, you will impact next year's crop. You will remove upwards of 50% of next year's crop. So Abscission was initially in place because they wanted this, okay, we got these machines that work in the early season, early mid-season, early Valencia era, but now as you go into late May, early June, when the next year's crop is starting to emerge and enlarge, then you've got to shut down. So if Abscission could allow a harvester to go in and take off this year's crop without taking off next year's crop, that was the value. Well, as we dealt with this whole issue of damage and concern, the thought became, what's more important is that we don't beat up these trees, whether it's early and mid-season crops or late season Valencia crops. So I thought that was going to be the major value of Abscission. The challenge of Abscission is that it's going to be hard to manage. We were just, for the entire time we were dealing with Abscission, we were limited to 10 acres, 10 total acres. So how do you parameterize the recipe for working with Abscission? Concentration, interval between application and harvest, effective rain, effective temperature.
Yeah, a lot to figure out, because
Yeah.
if with the systems now with the catch frames, if the Abscission chemical is put on and it is too good, then when
Yeah.
you go in there
Well-
to pick, all your fruit's on the ground, or a lot
Well-
of your fruit's on the ground, and you're
Yeah.
defeating your purpose.
No, I mean, we did lots of trials with Jackie, and Jackie came out. In fact, there was a trial just up the road here, and we put the Abscission out. Let me back up. There was a trial south of town, and put out the Abscission, and we came back 3 days later and basically found no efficacy. Well, the temperature's a little cold. This was like in February, so a little chilly. So we waited a month and redid it again, different grove, and Jackie said, I want to make sure this thing works. So she hit it a little extra hard with the concentration, came back 3 days later, 30% of the fruit was on the ground. So Abscission worked. And so it loosened the fruit.
That produces a whole new challenge.
Another-
You got your fruit on the ground.
But it's a management challenge. How much do you apply? How much loosening do you need to get the fruit off the tree? And then also to affect how do you ultimately get it so that you can have the machines work in such a way that you don't create this damage we were talking about. Another issue that's kind of tied into Abscission, which got to be a huge issue as well for the processors, was the debris, trash, leaves, sticks, stuff that the harvesters would collect along with the fruit and put into the bulk trailers. And so Mitch Willis would call me and say, hey, come up and look at this stuff. And all this stuff would be kind of falling out of these trailers as they were going into the plant's bulk bins, and all kinds of debris and trash and limbs, and they're breaking, roller pins, and dumpsters are filling up with debris, and he says, I don't want to deal with all this trash. So Abscission was also shown to reduce the amount of trash that was going into the loads. Again, not shaking the tree as hard, fruit coming off easier, less trash. So there was a value there as well.
Well, having watched mechanical harvesting almost from the beginning, at least I was involved in the late 60s, early 70s, it appears to me that we do have a system that will work. When the time comes that we're going to need to go back to mechanical harvesting, and we're going to be optimistic and say we're going to find a solution to greening, and we're going to get uniform trees back in the field, and we're going to get that need to do there. And like you said, we can't be the only fruit crop out there that's not harvesting the processed fruit mechanically. That we do have the basis to be able to move in there and do something mechanically. So the Jim Simpsons and the Dick Tools and the early people, they didn't do it in vain. That we've got something that can work.
I think if I can paraphrase what you're saying, I think there's been a collective knowledge gain from the 60s program as well as the 90s program. And yes, I think that gives us a tremendous foundation to then pick up and move forward. Again, I'm not sure whether the trunk shakers are the right answer, or the canopy shakers. We may have to find new machines. Interestingly, though, going back to Abscission and trunk shakers, again, we said the industry, the growers that were involved with mechanical harvesting looked at the trunk shakers, saw what they perceived was a violent action, and just basically ran screaming into their groves saying, get out, get out, get out, get out. I remember poor Calvin Lloyd up here at CPI. I happened to be out there once, and Chuck Shaker, he was just about throwing up. He said, "I can't stand this. I can't look at this." And he just fled to his office. And then I think the next day they were out of the grove. But what one really, our best trial is with Jackie was working with Valencias late May. So we're into the late season crop, and using Obsidian and using a trunk shaker, but fundamentally changing how we shook the trees, not aggressively snapping them back and forth, but almost like bumping them. Just, for lack of a better word, we kind of swagged the tree, just kind of rocked it, just a very gentle rock. And I mean, the fruit rained off, and none of the little fruit came off with it. And we went back the next year, and there was no difference between that shook tree and a hand-picked tree. So we achieved that objective, and the trunk shaker worked beautifully. And of course, not vigorously shaking the tree, to my mind, okay, ma'am, sir, grower, there's no damage here. So in that case, Obsidian really was a nice. So again, I think, so having learned something about Obsidian and having gotten some experience, that the trunk shaker and the canopy shaker both rendered a solid economic return for their investment, if allowed to work, and if allowed to fill trailers and stuff like that. I think we have the components of a system that if the trees ever get back to a point where we can shake them, then I look forward to seeing that day.
Yeah, it's no longer just a dream. It is a reality that that we come to the point that some fine tuning, it can be almost a routine operation.
Actually, I think the savings are significant. I mean, this is on record, right? So for posterity, I still say, even in today's time, that you can harvest for less than $1 in the trailer, picking roadside, for less than $1. What are you paying now, Mr. Grower? You're
Go
paying.
for it. You saw them greening, I saw them greening, and you got the harvesting taken.
So, and again, I said that in a meeting. I think Mr. English called me. This is Mr. Jim English called me and said I don't know. He said a few other things about me, but there's a bunch of things that have to happen. I mean, these machines you got to use them. Once they're in the field, you can't turn them off. You got to let them go. Give them the trailers. The processors have to be open to a change in the way things are going to be managed. But if you can efficiently use a machine, and by efficiently I mean many hours, and that it brings in 95% of the available fruit, so you're not going back and having to clean up after these trees have been harvested with hand crews, gleaning crews, then the $1 a box is feasible. And I'm convinced that if greening hadn't come, I think we would have figured it out, because Obsidian would have come in and we could have worked with Obsidian. Unfortunately, that's often. Hopefully that'll get back on the table, but for right now, we don't have that option.
We're in a holding pattern.
Exactly.
Thank you, Fritz.
It's been a pleasure. I mean, I want to keep going now.
Appreciate it.